Award. Well, I am just beyond delighted to have you here. I've been wanting to do this for a really long time, so welcome to the next chapter.
Thanks, Ellie. Lovely to see you. Lovely to be here.
Wow, it's just brilliant. It really is. So, and also the pressure is on because we have got a lot to talk about Billboard. So, we're going to start as ever with the prologue. And you grew up in Newcastle, and you
I
say this
did.
is still very much in your blood, and you go back there a lot. But it sounds like you had a very lovely childhood.
Yeah, I was lucky. Just very, very lucky, really. Yeah, my dad was a butcher. We grew up in Newcastle. Spent a lot of time in Northumberland, going to the beaches, Tynemouth, Bamborough, that whole stretch of coastline, really. And that, when that's in your blood, it never really leaves you. So, and I was there until I guess I was about 21, 22, and then sort of went down to London to do some work. But yeah, it was pretty glorious.
It is. I went to Bamborough in lockdown, or when we all stayed at home. My goodness, that is a special place. I mean, it really is, isn't it? It's just like a hidden gem.
Yeah, what was interesting about lockdown actually was it's always been a bit of an open secret, Bamber in the northeast. But unless you were from the northeast, you didn't really know about it. And then all of a sudden, down the roads, there's a road that goes to the beach called the Winding, and they've never had to put double yellow lines down there because no one would ever park on that because otherwise you can't get down it.
Yeah.
But in lockdown, everyone started parking on that road, so it was just like this complete sort of it was mayhem. I think.
Yeah, I
But
think
it
that was
got,
us. We were
yeah,
there doing it.
it was
It
you.
was me and my husband. It was.
Yeah, yeah, but it's sort of back to normal again. It's one of those places I've been going there sort of 50 years, sort of longer, much longer than 50 years, and it's pretty much not changed. They've got a bigger car park, and house prices have gone up considerably. But apart from that, the raw material is very, very similar to what I remember growing up, and you can't, that's not true of a lot of places in this country. So, and particularly wild places, and it's a sort of it's still a very beautiful, sort of wide open, sandy place, and I love it. We've got lots to talk about later on, which but I go there a lot and always have done over the course of my life.
I can understand why. I can. And so you say that your dad was a butcher. So it wasn't you didn't come from acting family or anything at all like that. No. And you went off to school. So you went obviously to go to boarding school. And
I did, yeah.
and you said that I love the way you described yourself. Was it a little bit annoyingly diligent at school, but you were hardworking, but also you loved your sport. And I mean that was really. And you played. Was it Northumberland? Was it under 19s? You
Yeah.
played cricket. You campaigned to get football at your school. So you were living life to the full, really.
Yeah, sports always been a big thing for me, Ellie. It's sort of I grew up with it. My dad was a rugby player, and my mum was a tennis player. And actually, my mum and dad met playing tennis, sort of, and so sort of sports always been a huge part of me. And because of the kinds of schools that I went to, we were never allowed to watch telly. And so you had to fill your time with something else. So I've always filled my time with sort of sport in the afternoons, and then it would be stuff like playing music and a lot of acting and those kinds of things. So just all of the stuff outside of school, if you go away to school, and that's kind of what you sort of fill your time with. So I sort of feel sort of pretty well, unbelievably lucky in that regard, because a lot of the things that I do now I learned then. And I think we were allowed 2 hours of telly on a
Wow.
Saturday night. It was the professionals or Starsky and Hutch.
It was good telly.
Yeah, it was world class telling that. Yeah. So it's sports always been a big part of me. I'm a bit of a doer. I like
Mm,
doing stuff,
mm,
and I've been sort of, I suppose, surfing now since I grew out of being able to play rugby for the last sort of 30 years or so, and sort of off and on, and not as much as I would like to do, but and less so with kids. But although we just started getting back into that over the last sort of 2 or 3 years. So yeah, I do like to stay active and be active. It's always been a big part of me, really.
yeah, well, it really has, as we will go on to talk about. But so you have is it one brother and two sisters,
Yeah, yeah,
and did
yeah.
they all go to boarding school?
My younger brother did, and my elder sister did, and then the money ran out.
Right, right.
And because boarding school is expensive, and also we had a slightly complicated second half of our childhood because my dad lost his job, and he ran a chain of butchers, a big chain of butchers in the northeast, and he ran it with, there was a bit of a uncles and nephews and that kind of thing. There was a bit of a kind of a family disagreement, shall we say,
Okay, yeah.
and so he lost his job. So in that kind of a way, he was earning decent money, and then all of a sudden stopped earning any kind of money at all, and then he set up his own butcher's business. But it sort of, as a family, we were doing very well and quite well off, certainly for the first part of my childhood, and then all of a sudden the money literally fell off the end of a cliff. So in that kind of a way, and so my sister didn't get to go away to boarding school, unfortunately. And you know, these are nice problems to have. I'm not sort of pleading poverty here by any stretch of the imagination. We were still very lucky, and I still always feel very lucky to have had the childhood that I've had. But there was a bit in the middle where things got considerably more complicated,
Well, yeah.
and considerably sort of less cash flying around.
Well, I'm absolutely, you know, we all know about family disagreements, and these come, you know, they're sent to try us, Bill, as you well know. Did you like going to boarding school though? Was it something that, I mean, had your dad gone to boarding school? Did they that was something that he wanted it for his children?
Yeah, he thought, and my mum thought too, that the education that you get is the most important thing. And so he kind of sacrificed everything for it. So there were a couple of years where and again, I'm desperately keen not to plead poverty here at all, but we didn't have a car for a couple of years because we couldn't afford to run one. All of the money went on the education, and that was his choice, and he thought it was the most important thing. And I kind of get that now, because literally everything that I do now came from that kind of a point. But yeah, he had gone away to school. He went to a place in Scotland, Fettes, and my mum's brother, and my mum had been away to school. My mum's brother had been away to school, and we ended up going to the school that that her brother had been at. And so yeah, so in that kind of a way, it was sort of a family thing to do, and they'd sort of seen that it had been good for them. And to answer your question, it's funny because I remember going down for the first time in the car and in the rain, stopping outside of Scarborough with tomato soup in a thermos flask, screaming in the back of the car, kind of going, "You don't love me, do you know
Bill.
what I mean?" And actually,
Yes.
actually the polar opposite was true. They were
Yeah.
doing it because they loved us so
Yeah.
much, if you see what I
Yeah.
mean. But in that kind of way, it's a good question to ask, because you are away from your family for a very, very long time. I went away to school when I was 8, but all of the things that I do now come from that time. And so it's one of those sort of double-edged sword things,
Yeah.
where you're away from your family, and that is hard. And this is obviously way pre-internet, and so you're writing letters home, and you're not really we couldn't sort of speak on the phone or anything like that, certainly not in the prep school that I went to. So you're away from your family, but also by the same token, it's that means that you've got a lot of time to do lots of other stuff. So for instance, I play the clarinet, and I still do, because when I was 9, the headmaster of the school that I happened to be at who was a drummer, walked into our dormitory, pointed at me and went, "Ward, you will learn the clarinet. We don't have any clarinet players in our school." And so I did, and I wouldn't have if he hadn't said that. So, and I'm hugely grateful for that. And so in that kind of a way, it was really useful. And all the sport that I've played, and all the drama, all the music, all come from that time, and all of those things have stayed with me all the way through life. So in that kind of a way. And also the other thing you learn, I think, from schools like that, I was sort of going down on the train on my own from about the age of 11 or 12, is independence. And so in that kind of, and that's useful, and sort of making your own choices, all of that kind of stuff. That's useful, and that stays with you a bit too, I think.
Well, of course it does. And also, that was all done out of love, wasn't it? What your mum and dad did, they were doing it purely out of love. And I think if you do something out of love, you can't ever argue with it, because there's always going to be ups and downs. And my dad always used to say you gain a bit and you lose a bit, but look at what you gained, and your mum and dad were doing that purely, and look at what your dad sacrificed, and your mum.
Yeah, exactly that. And I've always been acutely aware of that. We all have, actually, as we've gone through life. And also, you just do what you think is the best thing to do, don't you?
Yes.
At the time.
Yeah.
And I've always been hugely grateful for it, because literally everything that I do comes from that point.
Well, as the listener is about to learn, because so your first chapter, but you went in, so you touched there, so you were playing the clarinet. I think that's brilliant, and you did a little bit of drama at school, but you went into advertising, and I love this about this, Bill, because it does seem to be a theme that everything you do to a very high standard, and our mutual, well, he's a relative of yours and very lovely friend of mine, my lovely friend and colleague, Mr. Matt Cardy, who put us in touch. We were having this conversation, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying, he was like, he's good at everything, and he just goes for everything he does. So you went into advertising, but not just any old advertising. You were there. Was it account director? You were working for Saatchi Saatchi. I mean, so we were talking like we're talking a bit Mad Men. This is like, this is a bit, I think that's what Mr. Cardy told me. He said, it's like Mad Men. But you were in there in London. Really, this was a big job.
Yeah, I did. I worked in advertising for 10 years, and I worked at two big agencies. One was BBH, Bartle Bogle Hegarty, which was it's not as lots of advertising agencies have kind of quite big, complicated names.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily as well known as Saatchi's, but at the time it was doing sort of really, it's a top 20, I would say, worldwide advertising agency now. At the time, it was a bit of a creative hothouse, and it was doing really, really first class, groundbreaking advertising. So it was the most creative advertising agency in the world for 2 years running. While I was there, I had nothing to do with that, incidentally. That was everyone else.
Well,
and they did the Levi's advertising, which was that was the thing that made their name, which was listeners of yours of a certain age may well remember.
Yes.
Nick Kamen sitting in a laundrette and taking off his jeans and sticking them in the washing machine.
Yes.
And that was BBH, Bartle Bogle Hegarty, and they did a lot of advertising like that. It was sort of, they talked about sort of emotional propositions. So they instead of hammering people with facts, which had been sort of the way with advertising up until that point, they had a thing about the strap line of the agency is, we don't sell, we make people want to buy. And the whole idea was to give emotional sort of selling propositions. So to give people reasons to buy things above and beyond facts, to make them feel like they would like to buy something, which is sort of ultimately, as we know, sort of very persuasive. And so I did the really unfashionable brands there. So they were doing really fashionable stuff like Audi cars, wow, Levi's jeans, Pretty Polly tights, and I did cat food.
There you go. I love that.
Yeah, I did cat food. Arthur the cat, who used to eat with his paw.
Yeah, but I remember that.
Yeah, it was good. It was seminal advertising. It was brilliant. And he was a lovely creature, actually, Arthur the cat. But I loved it, and I loved it. I really loved advertising. It was one of the two things I'd only ever wanted to do, and I'd sort of, since I'd been about 13 or 14, in the holidays when we were allowed to watch television, I'd sort of watched. I really it took a shine to the adverts, and I was fascinated by them, and I was fascinated by what makes people buy things and why people buy the things that they do, and that really stayed with me, and I had a sense that I was going to do something with that. And I've got a history degree, and history remains a kind of big sort of part of my life. But when I was doing that degree, it's similar territory, actually. History is less about what happened, much more about why it happened and why humans do the things that they do. And so in that kind of a way, advertising and history as subjects are more closely aligned than you might imagine. And so for me, it was quite a neat segue. It's quite a straight line to go from history into advertising and try and work out what it was that people sort of why it was that people bought things, what made them buy things, and I've always been interested in that, and still am interested in that. Incidentally, it's I don't think that's something that ever leads you. It's really about human nature in lots of ways, in the human condition, as is a lot of the other stuff that I do. But there is a sort of through line there in that kind of way, and I worked for Saatchi's as a strategic planner for a couple of years later on as well. So and both of those agencies, do great work and great advertising. So yeah, no, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Lots of my friends actually are from that time still, and we all keep in touch, and a lot of them have moved out of the agency world into consultancy and all of those kinds of things. But very much enjoyed my time in advertising.
Well, it's just fascinating. So you went to university. So how did you get into advertising? What was your first job?
I just applied. I wrote a lot of letters, and actually in the acting world now, I still do a lot of that. I've always done a lot of that. Even at school, I was writing a lot of letters home. So in that kind of a way, there's a through line there really. And yeah, I wrote a lot of letters off to all of the big ad agencies. I'd worked out in my second year that might be something for me to do. We didn't know anybody who worked in that kind of a world, but one of my flatmates at university, his dad worked for Philip Morris, who made cigarettes, Marlboro cigarettes, and he'd got me some work experience at a couple of big agencies in town over a summer holiday. So I worked a summer holiday as a student, and it was one of those things where you've got a sort of an idea of whether something might be a good idea, and you just need to find out if it is. And I loved it. I just loved the conversations you had with people, and the intellectual subject matter of it, because it's very rigorous advertising. It's really rigorous, and you cannot say anything that isn't true. You can tell selective truths, but that's all anyone does in real life anyway. But the truth of something is tested to destruction. So in that kind of a way, you can only tell truths. And what you have to do in the advertising world is work out what is the truth of this particular product or service or whatever it is, and what is it about that people might find interesting, or why might it be good for them. So I found it sort of intellectually really sort of stimulating and brilliant. Actually, I loved it as a job, but also I was kind of aware that that wasn't all there could be. And I remember sort of, I'm not particularly religious, but I do remember sort of having these conversations with myself. I used to keep a journal. I used to write down stuff in it and sort of all of those kinds of things. And I used to write in big capital letters every sort of couple of months, is this all there is? And not because I wasn't enjoying it, because I was, but you do kind of go, is this everything? Is this everything? And if it is that enough? Yeah. And so I remember having that kind of conversation with myself a fair old amount, and like I say, I loved it. But you do every now and again. There was this one time. I'll tell you a quick story. Actually, there was one time I was going on the train with some other people from the agency up to a client in Birmingham. And on the way back, we were just pulling into Euston, and there was a guy. They look after you in advertising. You travel first class. It's all very nice. And there was a guy in about 3 seats back who we hadn't really noticed. We'd been sort of talking around the table, and he just walked past our table, and he had a bit of paper which he'd written on and folded up, and he just put it on our table. He didn't say anything. Walked past our table, put his bit of paper on the table, and walked out the door. And we sort of were just getting our bags together and getting up to leave the train at Euston. And we picked up the bit of paper, opened it up, and it said, "What wit, what intelligence, what a waste." And it was one of those things where you kind of go, goodness me. And there was a part of that that chimed with me in a kind of where you kind of go, I love this world, but is this everything? Is this everything that could be?
And you had no idea who that man was?
No, absolutely never saw him again. I never really saw him at all.
Wow.
And it's really interesting, isn't it, when you those kind of things sort of come in from left field, and you kind of go, oh, that's hit a nerve with me.
It's stuck. Okay, so there's lots to discuss here, Bill. So I knew you were going to be a tricky guest, Bill, because we haven't even begun. I knew. So just because we like the ins and outs, where did you go to university?
Bristol.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Okay. So
I did the history course here. I did a history degree here at Bristol Uni, and I had a brilliant. I just had a brilliant time. All of my favourite things: lots of sport, lots of music, lots of drama, some work.
Yeah. Sounds. I'm sure you handle it very well with your clarinet as well, because we mustn't forget the clarinet, because we have to bring that in. But also, you said there as well, when you going back just while we're still in the advertising, when you said there about, and I say this actually a little bit with my own personal hat on, because as somebody who writes fiction books and is learning all about marketing and advertising, which is a whole new world. But you're absolutely right, because it makes you, on the first hand, you sort of think, oh, you can't sell, but it's not that. It's never about that. And so, for example, when you go back to Arthur and the cat, and with the cat food, when you talk about the emotion, how would you do that then with something like that, with Arthur the cat food? What emotions would you be aiming at for your customer?
It's really interesting. So in the advertising world, you have a bit of paper, and it's called the brief. And on the brief, you have lots of questions with boxes next to them, and it's things like, who is the target audience? What must the advertising say? Why should the consumer believe it? So those are generally on something like that. And there's also a box about background. And in the what must the advertising say box, and you're only allowed one sentence, it has to be clear, because if it's not clear for the creative team who are writing the brief, it's not going to be clear for an audience who are on the receiving end of it. And in lots of agencies, the what must the advertising say box is also called the single-minded proposition. So it has to be one clear thought. And for Arthur and his cat food, it was Arthur recommends Catamate. That's all it was.
That's all it was.
And the idea with it is that if you can sort of set up a cat as discerning as Arthur, who was very discerning as a cat because he'd been around a while, and he will only eat Catamate. And also he had this thing about bringing teaching his friends and his kids also to eat cat food. Then that kind of it's a kind of like a personal recommendation. It's the kind of thing. It's a bit like sort of star power with a human, like a Hollywood star, only in the cat food world, saying this cat recommends this particular cat food. And you can only do that if you've got a really tasty cat food, because we used to have a saying in advertising, which is there's nothing that kills a bad product faster than good advertising, because what will happen is people will go and buy it, find out the thing you've claimed isn't true, and never buy it again. And not only will they never buy it again, they'll tell everybody else not to buy it. So you can only do that kind of stuff if you have got something that really stacks up. And the cat food at the time was in the cat food was very palatable. It was very tasty. It was on a par just below with Whiskers, which was the big heavy hitter at the time. And so you can say that. And also it was just a very different way of going about advertising it with a cat who kind of had his own personality, and it was just a softer way in, really, just a softer, slightly more left field way in, and people used to remember it because of that. And and it was great fun to work on. And I used to go to catteries and kind of hang out with sort of rooms full of 50 and 100 cats. I got really into it as a subject. I loved it. And in the advertising world, you become sort of immersed in each of your subject areas, whether it's chocolate or cat food or whatever it is, and I loved it. It was the sort of one of the brands that I definitely loved working on the most there. It was, and also because it was such an alien world for me. I'd only ever had dogs. We had a lot of dogs growing up, and so you're sort of launching yourself into this brand new place. You kind of go, wow, what is there to learn here? How can we make sense of it? So it was great fun.
Amazing. And just finally on this, so then going back to the jeans with Nick Cayman, then I mean we all remember that advert, and I know that wasn't your side because, to be frank, I think because the cat food. I mean, to be fair, everyone's buying that all the time, so I can understand why. And animals, and we love our animals, but with the jeans, what would that have been then? With the what? Because he was taking his jeans off in the laundrette and he put them in.
It's just about attitude, isn't it?
Right.
It's just about wanting to be that kind of person. And what was interesting about the jeans advertising, it was a very, very sort of tight target audience. So between it was something like I didn't work on it, so this is slightly hearsay, and I'm sure that some of my friends will put me right immediately if they hear this and tell me you're wrong. But it'd be something a very tight target audience, like between 18 to 24-year-olds of what were called opinion formers, like so the cool people, so what you would call an influencer now. And because the reality of Levi's jeans was that 45-year-old middle-aged, 50-year-old middle-aged men were buying them, but you didn't talk to them. They were buying them because they thought that the cool people bought them. Yeah. And so what you do with it is be very, very specific, and you've got to be very careful with a big brand like that, because if the very cool people see too many of the middle-aged men buying them, then they might not buy them themselves and might move on to something else. So in that kind of a way, you've got to be sort of very specific and discreet with your with your targeting, I guess. I found all of that stuff really fascinating about why people buy things and who. But that was purely emotional. It was purely about, and they were sort of mining also a 1960s soul, 1950s and 60s soul, and Stand By Me, and all of that sort of, and so they were sort of making short films essentially that would often last for 60 seconds, but were very compelling soundtracks and very arresting visually and emotionally, and they are based on sort of some kind of fact, which is the rivets, the things that it is that keeps the jeans together, but really it's about how it feels to wear them.
Amazing. And when you think about it now, like you say, what was that? God, I mean, it was a long time ago. And now we live on these minute films. I mean, everything is. So much of it is, which is just, wow. Anyway, I could talk about that for a long time more, but I'm not going to, because we've got to move on. Because so there you were thinking, is this it? Is there something else? Now, were you still acting at this stage?
Yeah. I did a lot of acting. So I did a lot of acting at prep school. I did really a lot of it at public school, at big school. We had when I'd been there, they were just building a new theatre out of a converted church, and the first year I got there, they just opened it. So when I was at school, that's what I did. I just did a lot of acting, and I directed some stuff, and I did a lot of acting, and I loved it. And so when I was a student, I did a lot of acting. One of my history teachers was Dr. Pemble, who was an ex-actor himself, and we had a deal whereby I would do sport and acting during the term times, and I'd catch up with the essays in the holidays, and as long as I handed everything in the first week of the following term, he was happy. Wow. And so it was brilliant. And it's really interesting, those kinds of what would appear to be very small decisions but make a huge difference to your life, just quietly bending rules without telling anybody. That made a huge difference to me, and is one of the reasons that I'm doing what I'm doing now, because I could do all of the things that I like to do, whereas if I'd had to stick by the sort of the traditional timetable, that would have been an awful lot more difficult. So I'd done a lot of acting at university as well, and then when my sister was in an Amdram organisation club in Chelsea called the Chelsea Players. So when I was starting out in advertising, I did one of their plays, and it was great. We did Equus. I was Alan Strang and that, and it was great. I loved it. But it was difficult to marry with advertising, because in the advertising world, you, at the drop of a hat, you can be there until 3 or 4 in the morning preparing for a pitch or whatever it is. In your world too, I would imagine, the timetables can change at very, very short notice. But in the acting world, that cannot happen. You have a rehearsal and you have to make it. So that was tricky, and I noticed how tricky that had been. And so I only did that once in that kind of a way. Although when I was at Saatchi's, actually later on, I did another play. There was a friend of mine who's a professional actor that I knew from university, and one of their actors dropped out. So at short notice, I kind of helped him out, and that's actually one of the catalysts to going to doing it full time. I realised how much I missed it and how much I loved it. And it was one of those moments when you kind of go, God, I've got to do something about this. I just have to do something about this. And yeah, so it's these things. It's funny, isn't it? They just come in from loads of different angles, often from left field and slightly unexpected, as to what is the catalyst for moving you forward.
But what's interesting is all the seeds were sown, so sort of going back to when you were school, and wasn't that amazing to have somebody at university like that was so supportive of you as well? And I think that is these people along the way, and even the man on the train putting that down. But also you were obviously open enough to be able to see it, because I think we all get these signs, but sometimes we're so closed, we don't allow ourselves to see them. So you obviously were kind of looking out there. And so how did you do it? Did you leave advertising did you go to drama school?
I did, yeah. I put myself through drama school when I was 32.
Right.
And it was a 1-year postgrad at a place called the Actors Company in London, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was brilliant. I loved it. I really loved it. It was sort of 40 hours a week over sort of 3 days plus the occasional evening, but really over 3 days. So we did 9 in the morning till 10 at night, and so it was quite hardcore, and it didn't suit everybody, but it really suited me, because I quite like that kind of sort of immersive, chuck yourself at it kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And what was also interesting about it was, because it was on the weekend, it was a Friday, Saturday and Sunday, we had the best teachers in London, because they were freelancers. Most of the teachers for the big acting schools are freelance, and so they would come to us on the weekend when they weren't teaching during the week. So we had, teachers from Lambda and RADA and Drama Centre, and lots of really, really thoughtful, brilliant humans who taught us. And so it was really a theatre school. So I learned a lot about hardcore Russian drama training, Stanislavski. That's what we learned. And,
wow.
Which is, which I still use. I love it. It's a great sort of way of learning your craft, but also by the same token, it's not the only way of learning it. And since then, it's useful, I think, to have a starting point for something, and then to add. I often say, when I'm sort of teaching, and I teach photography and I teach acting, is to just cherry pick stuff. Use the stuff that works for you. The rest of it, park it. If it's not working for you, don't worry about it, and build your own kind of sort of smorgasbord of stuff from all of the influences that you bump into that make sense. And that's certainly what I've done. There's, in the acting world, there's loads and loads of different ways of doing it. There's Meisner, there's Chekhov, as well as Stanislavski, and there's also just the people you meet who have just great ideas, and you kind of go, oh, that's good, I'm going to keep that. And so it was great. It was perfect for me. It was to do a sort of really intensive 1-year postgrad, and to come out and to chuck yourself at it and see what happened.
But that's what you'd done up until there, hadn't you? With your boarding school, with university, with the advertising world. So it was like you're clearly all in. But also, I love that, Bill. You're 32, and I think especially something like acting, people, it's very easy to tell yourself, in any stage in life, oh, it's too late, it's too late. And actually 32 going into acting, probably at the time, that was a risk. And okay, we can look back in hindsight and know it was absolutely the right decision, but you had no idea you were leaving this. I suppose you could have, perhaps, did you think perhaps I can go back to the advertising, at least I've given it a go? But it was a big brave thing to do. And then what I think is amazing is you didn't get just any old job. I mean, amazing that you got Charlie Stubbs in Coronation Street with Tracy Barlow, which is where obviously I particularly remember you from, and I'm sure the listener does. But when my husband and we were talking about this, and it was the fact that like Tracy Barlow went to prison because of you. I mean, it's huge. So how did that all come about? Because that really is going from that, from the beginning to like, wow, you're in then Coronation Street at the peak of its fame, and there you were. You were catapulted into this world.
Yeah, I mean, lots of questions in there. It's really interesting, this stuff. For me, and you mentioned earlier about risk, and for me, the risk would have been not to do it, because I'd felt it. And I couldn't. It was one of those things that it was with me, and I had it, and I knew I felt it. And ever since I was 13, there had only ever been two things that I'd ever wanted to do, ever. And one was advertising, and I'd done it. And the other one was acting. And I'd always secretly, quietly wondered, what if? And for me, I just needed to find out. And I didn't have any dependents at the time. And in that kind of a way, and you're also right, I kind of thought, well, if I do my year's training, I took notes, copious notes of all of the workshops and the games we played, because I thought I might be teaching it. What I thought I might be doing is running workshops for business people on presentation skills, using what I'd learnt in the acting sort of in the 1 year postgrad to do that. So I was kind of aware that that's what might happen, and what happened actually was much more than I'd imagined might happen. So I just left drama school like you do. We had an end of year show. We did a Rattigan at the end of our year in the German Street Theatre, which is right in the bowels of St James's in Piccadilly. It was, I mean, I'm sure it's been done up, but it was quite sort of salubrious at the time. There was literally an open drain where the water, which you had to hop over to get onto the stage. So, I mean, it was great fun and great training. But I got an agent from that. And then you kind of get, and I hadn't necessarily expected to get one of those. And you kind of go, oh, okay, all right, then let's see what happens. And so what I was doing straight after that was working as a freelance for advertising agencies, as a planner for various advertising agencies, whilst I was applying for gigs as in theatre, fringe theatre, a lot of fringe theatre. And I was lucky in that because of the drama school I'd been to, I didn't come out with a lot of debt. And because of the job that I had previously, I'd saved up money to get me through drama school. And the drama school I'd been to, you could work during the week to pay for it. So that meant I could do fringe, because the thing about fringe is you get very little money, and one of the first fringe gigs I got was a 4-month gig at Battersea Arts Centre doing a Christmas carol, and it was 4 months from middle of October through to the end of January, and we got £40 for 4 months work, not a day, not a week, not a month, in total. And so to do that kind of thing, you have to have another way of earning money. And I was lucky in that I had a profession. So for the first 2 years, that's what I was doing. I was doing a lot of fringe theatre like that at sort of at various fringe theatres, White Bear, those kinds of venues. And rep theatre as well down here. It's here. I did 3 shows in a row down here in Bristol, actually, Bristol Old Vic. And then Coronation Street came like completely out of the blue, like totally out of the blue. I'd done 2 television gigs. I'd done The Bill. I'd done one episode, maybe 2 episodes of The Bill. And I'd done another episode. I'd done an episode of Footballers' Wives,
which
is just genius television. Loved that. It was great, huge fun. And there was another thing with Nick Berry, who used to be in EastEnders.
Yes.
I did a policeman in that,
Policeman.
literally
Yeah.
just saying, stop. There we are. That was a performance. And and Coronation Street came completely out of the blue, like totally out of the blue. My agent, they were looking for a new builder. And they were looking for a new builder, someone around 50, 45, sort of 50, a native Mancunian. And my agent had someone who was up for that and had done very well. And they kind of said, we still haven't quite found who we're looking for. Have you got anyone else on your books? And she said, well, I've got this other guy. He's from the north. I'm sure he can do a Mancunian accent. Why don't you have a look at him?
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so it was one of those kind of things where you literally, you know how it is in our business, at a day's notice, I call one afternoon to go up to Manchester the next morning, actually, to do an audition for this builder guy. And so that night, I'd never been to Manchester. Actually, it's not true. My sister was at the university, so I'd been once to see her. So I had been in the city. I'd never spent any time there. And so I went to see an old friend of an old acting teacher of mine that night in her flat. She very kindly sort of taught me a Mancunian accent at 8 o'clock at night.
Wow.
And then I went up on the train the next morning and did the audition. And as with these things, you do them and then you park them, because in our world, statistically, you're not likely to get most of the jobs you go up for. So all you do is you do them, you enjoy them, you chuck yourself at them, then you move on. You park it and you move on. And I wasn't expecting to hear anything back. And then I did.
Oh my goodness. But it's just amazing. But do you not think that, and this is why I find these conversations so fascinating, that everything that had happened to you up until this point, or your life, it was almost like gearing you up for this moment. Because when you think about going back to when you went to boarding school and then you were there with your tomato soup, and it's really what your mum and dad were teaching you as well was resilience. And it's a tough thing to have to learn, but we all have to learn it. So you had your resilience, you've got your drive, this lovely drive, and being very passionate about what you do. But also, that was a lot of work there, that you were working, doing your advertising, doing your drama at the weekends, and then, to go and do the play for £40. I hope when you did your Nick Berry, you probably for that stop got more for that stop, that word of stop. But the point is, you did all these things, you took it all in because you were working, and you, like you said, you had more of a fear that you wouldn't do it. That was the fear. So actually, and then to go and, to just be ready, because they say this, don't they, that life brings it to you when you're ready, and everything could come together for that moment. And then you're there with the teacher learning about the Manchester accent, but to be able to go and pull that off the next day in the way that you did, it's like everything came together, and you really did pull it off, because then you're in this massive, especially at that time, it was one of the biggest things ever, really, wasn't it? And to be, that part that you had was huge.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of really unexpected. They took a huge risk on me because I was sort of pretty inexperienced in the acting world. I'd done quite a lot of theatre by then. I'd sort of understudied in the West End for a while as well, and sort of done a fair amount of stuff. But in television, I'd done almost nothing. And so they took a huge punt on me. It was Kieran Roberts was the producer on it, and I'll always be hugely grateful to him for that, because it was a massive punt, and he sort of put a lot of faith in me for that. And for me, I was learning on the job, and with a show like that, because I'd never filmed television that filmed that fast, because we were sort of when I finally got offered it, I was literally filming a fish sauce commercial in Amsterdam, and it was on the Wednesday night I was offered it, and they said, right, you've got an overnight to think about it if you'd like to do it. So I rang my agent back on the Thursday and went, yeah, I would like to do it. I came back from the fish sauce advert in Amsterdam on the Friday. The scripts arrived on at my door on the Saturday, and on the Sunday I was up, and on the Monday I was filming. Wow. And so it was one of those kind of whoa. Yeah. So you kind of you learn on the job, and you learn quickly, and it's one of the things that I really loved about it, and really valued it, as a job, because you have to get out of the way of yourself. You have to choose, and you have to commit, and you're shooting things out of order, and you just have to make choices and then stick by them. And so in that kind of, and also the other way that a soap works is very similar to theatre, actually, which it's ensemble. So you're working not only with all of the other actors in the scene, but you're also working with all of the other, and you'll have it in your job, all of the other technicians. So you're working with the camera operators, you're working with the sound operators, and you have to make this stuff together, and it's no good if it's good for you and it's not good for them. So it's a real sort of process of give and take. But I've done a lot of theatre, and the theatre world really does sort of prepare you for that kind of stuff in that kind of a way. So I loved it. It was, and particularly, as you say, that character, he was quite an unusual man, and I really, I just enjoyed the process of trying to work out who he was and why he did what he did. And so for me, and as you were kind of saying earlier, there is a line here, a through line through with all of the other things that I've kind of done, which it is to all of the things that I've done are to a certain extent about the human condition and why people do the things that they do. And this is just another, was another sort of way into that. Now, I did a lot of research on him. I did a lot of work with Women's Aid, who were hugely helpful, the National Domestic Violence Charity, and they were amazing with me and sort of putting me in touch with people who'd been on the receiving end of Charlie Stubbs. Charlie Stubbs, for your listeners, and there's no reason why they should know who he was an abusive man. So he took people apart, sometimes physically, usually emotionally, bit by bit over time. He was clever, he was manipulative, and in that kind of a way. So I did a lot of work with Women's Aid, and he was, and the thing for me that I found with him, it was about trying to work out what was at his center, what was it that drove him, and we ended up deciding that it was about control. And once I got that, then everything else fell into place, because you kind of go, of course, it's not about red mist, it's not about out and out violence, it's about control, and everything feeds off that. And so once I'd worked that out, then the rest of the character sort of fell into place. And if I could always find a route back to its kind of sort of root point, then I knew we were in business.
That's incredible. And actually, you would never believe really that would have linked to your advertising world, but that goes to what we were talking there about the emotion and what's motivating. That's really fascinating. And and again, because you have this way of looking at life, I mean, to go into something like Coronation Street, and then you're there with, Bill Roach, and you've got these people, and like, Deirdre Barlow, and who was running the Rovers Return at the time? It was
gosh, I can't remember. I mean, I had a long sort of tryst with Sally Lindsay's character, who was Shelley, and
you did.
So there was quite a bit of that going on as well. So
it was, you were there with these, but to be able to, sorry Bill to interrupt you, but to go into, to be able to do this job that you're relatively new at, with this enormous character as well, and a very complex character, but also to be able to act alongside these people that you know. I mean, how did you cope with that? In your, like, I mean, I appreciate you know what you're doing, but surely anyone's a little bit, when Ken's there, when Ken Barlow is that, you're gonna wobble a little bit, aren't you, surely?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because the first time you walk into that green room, it's extraordinary, because you recognize literally everybody in it. The green room, incidentally, is the bit that actors gather in before they go on set, and it was just full. I remember walking in there for the first time. And actually, interesting that you mentioned Bill Roach, because he was the first person who came up to me and said hello and welcome. Right, and he does that with all of the new actors into Coronation Street over the years. And I'll always be really grateful for that, because you do need, because this was, like, exactly as you say, a completely alien world in that kind of a way. I'd never done anything like it, whether it was in theatre or the other very small amounts of television that I'd done. I'd never done anything on this scale, and as you say, with this kind of audience, my out episode I think was watched by 13.9 million people. It was a lot of people back in those days, and so in that kind of way, you're aware that you're walking into, and also into something with a huge amount of history, like just a colossal amount of history, and which means so much to so many people, not just the actors in it. And it means a lot to the actors in it. They're very aware of their responsibility to the show and to the storylines, but also to the viewers. You're really, really aware that this is in the homes of 14 million people a night, and that they're watching it 5 times a week, often up to that number. And so the role that this show plays in their life, and you have a responsibility, and you're keenly aware of that. And you're also aware that there is less rehearsal time, in fact none, for this job than for any other you have ever done. Because on the soap you're filming up to 30 pages, maybe on a very, very tough day 40 pages a day. You won't necessarily be speaking on each of those pages, although occasionally you are. Incidentally, occasionally they'll just shoot 10 scenes in a row as two-handers, you and one other person. So for me, with Charlie Stubbs, it might be Sally Lindsay's character, and you're shooting kind of like a day, back-to-back scenes, one after the other, after the other, after the other. And you just have to trust yourself a little bit and do as much prep as you can. So the hardest week for me, the 2 hardest weeks for me, were the first 2 weeks, because I hadn't had any prep. As discussed, the script had landed on whatever it was on the Saturday, and I'd literally had a day to look at them, literally a day. And he's a whole new character. And actually, the other interesting thing about him was the character had changed name since I auditioned for him. So when I first went through the scripts, I couldn't find him at all. So he wasn't originally Charlie Stubbs. I think he was Dave Mason,
right,
was his name. And I think
know
there was
a
a
Dave
builder in
Mason.
Manchester called Dave Mason.
Right.
So they went, we can't do that. And so that was interesting. And also that was interesting because who someone is called changes who they are.
Yeah.
Because being called, he wasn't called Charles Stubbs. He was called Charlie Stubbs, and that tells you something about him. And so all of these kinds of things, you're just looking for clues. But when you first get scripts like this and you've got maybe a paragraph of backstory, that's all you have to go on. One of the things that's fascinating about soaps is they only shoot in the present. You have an unknown past, you might have a paragraph on it, but it's mostly unknown, and you certainly have an unknown future. And all you can do is play the present. Whereas I came from a world where you have theatre and plays which have got a very strong preordained narrative arc, and your character has a very clear narrative arc, and you can plot your way through it. With a soap, all you have is the present, and then you have to try and work out the past and the future from the present. And it's fascinating. I mean, I loved it as a job, because there is so much sort of imaginative work sort of inherent in it, and it was brilliant for me. And as discussed, they took a huge chance on me, because I was so sort of, I'd done so little television at the time, and I'd done a fair amount of theatre, but particularly television. So in that kind of way, I will always be very grateful.
And did they plan for the character to be as big? You said he was going to be a builder. Did they plan for him to be as big as for that role to get as big as it did?
Yeah, it's really, I don't know. I mean, I know a lot of the time they've often got, as I understand it, and there will be people higher up in ITV who know more about this than I do. But when you go into a show like that, they've got sort of year-long, sort of, they do these story conferences. Well, they sort of sketch in a year's worth of storylines, and then sort of they'll have 6 months where they have a pretty good idea, and 3 months when they do know what is going to happen. So when there's a new character, when you go into a show like that, you've got essentially 3 months of pre-planned storyline, and after that the writers are watching, like the viewers are watching, to see what you do. And then it's a kind of a question of what happens next, if you see what I mean. And I think they sort of, when I'd auditioned for it, they wanted him to be an out and out nasty piece of work, and that's what I'd auditioned for, and I'd seen that in the writing. But when I went into the show, they just had a nasty piece of work in it, and they went, can we just make him a slightly cheeky chappy happy to begin with. And I went, yeah, sure. But what was interesting about that for me was the thing that the hard edges that I'd seen on him at the audition stage in the writing weren't quite as hard. He was slightly more amorphous. And so when they started writing stuff that were about a year and a half in, that was tougher, stronger, harder, for me, that was the sort of the meat of the character.
Yeah.
That was the stuff that I'd recognised from the audition, and that was the stuff that I'd identified with. So when they started writing that for him, for me, it all of a sudden the character exploded in terms of sort of possibility and that kind of thing.
Yeah, incredible. And how did you? We will move on, but it's just because it is so fascinating. How did you cope? Because going to that and then to be surely very suddenly you were instantly recognised, and that must have been. Were you married at this stage?
No, and I had a partner at this stage, but I've always sort of been sort of famously quiet about private life and all of those kind of things, just because of the intensity of the gaze of a show like that. And you kind of go, you have to choose, and we'll talk about photography in a second, I would imagine, but you have to choose what you're going to share and what you're going to keep for you. And I've always been happy to talk about my work, and because that's but I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine who worked at The Guardian, and he, before I started Corrie actually, and he said, you're going to get asked all sorts of different kinds of questions. Here is what you do need to answer. Here is what you can keep for yourself should you wish. And I've always I have kids now, and I'm very sort of keen to sort of shield them from the gaze of the public, if you see what I mean. I like them to have as normal an upbringing as possible. Everyone's different with this kind of stuff, but that's the thing that makes sense to us most, I suppose. So and it's interesting that some humans are sort of, and some actors are sort of hugely gregarious, share everything with everybody kinds of people. I'm not one of those kinds of people. I'm quite a private individual, quite quiet away from work. And so in that kind of way, to be landed in the middle of this enormous kind of show that everyone watches it was quite a surprise. And I had some idea of the scale of it. But there's nothing that quite prepares you for 14 million people knowing who you are.
Yeah, and it's huge. It really. I remember I worked for GMTV as a runner, and we used to do shows, and the soap stars would come onto it. And I had to show Jim McDonald to his car, and I'd never seen anything like it. He was mobbed. Yeah. And I bet you were as well. I bet you were when you walked out.
Well, it's one of those things, isn't it? You kind of, I mean, I sort of used to find a way of, I had this, when I was working on Coronation Street, I found a way of walking down the canals of Manchester to get me into, so that I didn't have to walk along roads, because Charlie Stubbs was not a pleasant individual.
No, well, that's the other thing.
So he used to get quite a lot of grief on the streets. And the trouble is, because I don't do a lot of interviews, or certainly didn't do a lot of interviews then. I would do interviews for work, but it's sort of outside of work. I don't do the sort of the OK magazine, all of those kind of things. So, and I wouldn't talk a lot about sort of my life outside the show. So the only thing that people knew about me was him.
Yeah, baddie.
Yes, that's it. So, and that's the name that people would shout at you at the street, or they'd shout, "Oi, builder," or do you know what I mean? Oi, Charlie, or whatever. And so I'd worked out a way which took quite a lot longer of walking from my digs. I had to have digs. I was living in Brighton at the time. I had to have digs in the centre of Manchester, and I worked out a way of walking to Coronation Street that was down the canals, which is a really long, circuitous route. But A, it was quiet. B, there was was history all around me, and C, and we'll talk about this I'm sure in a bit, water, which is one of my very, very, very favourite things. And so that for me, A, in a sort of mindfulness way in terms of preparing for the day and sort of thinking about what you're about to do and having the scenes going through your head was great, but it also avoided all of the pointing and the shouting, and which was fine. And most people, 95 out of 100, were really welcoming, really kind, just want to say hello and talk about the show and all of those kind of things. And as I mentioned earlier, you have a huge responsibility to the show when you take it on, and this show is a huge thing in the lives of so many people, and particularly Mancunians are hugely proud of it, and rightly so. But there is a sort of a 5 out of 100 that might give you a little bit of grief. So and particularly with a character like that, you just have to be slightly careful of that kind of stuff. So I just sort of worked out a route, like I say, of getting into work.
That's incredible. Honestly, I could talk to you about it all day. I won't, but it is because also, I mean, you stayed and then you did the same. You were in Emmerdale, 750 episodes. So I mean, it became a real part of your life, having to do that. Is it true that it is more fun to play a baddie?
It's such a good question. I mean, I've done plenty of both. The things people, what's interesting about baddies is that from an acting point of view, they're fascinating because they're other, and you have to work out their morality, because you're kind of going, so what is it about you that makes you think that these things are okay? Because almost all of the sort of, in inverted commas, baddies, nasty pieces of work that I have played don't think that's what they're being. Occasionally I've done a bit of panto, and you do occasionally have the Abanazes in Aladdin who are bad and they know they are. Do you know what I mean? But generally in real life, what you're trying to do is you're trying to motivate the behavior of these individuals and find out what it is that makes them behave like they do. And so in that kind of way, I find that stuff absolutely fascinating. And for that reason, yes, they are fun to play, because you're digging under the skin of human nature and you're sort of trying to find truths and little bits of someone's psyche that makes them do what they do. And what was interesting specifically about Charlie Stubbs was that he did have a morality. It was just slightly skewed away from the norm. And so for me, it was about trying to work out why and how he would justify his behavior. And for me, I worked out sort of quite a complicated backstory for him, which was to do with sort of retribution and revenge and getting his own, and also keeping himself safe. By keeping in control of other people, he could control what happened to him in a world, I'd imagined, a childhood where that might not have been the case for him. And so always with kind of characters, you're looking, you're mining, you're going back and you're going underneath, trying to find the hardest thing. And I had it, I've had it a few times, is when they kind of go, we just want this guy to be likable. And you kind of go, but why? Why likable? What is it about this man that you would like, that people would like? So always with acting, acting is sort of reverse engineering of the human condition. You start with the words and you go back to the thoughts, whereas in real life you start with the thoughts and then the words come out. And so what you're always trying to do, you're given the words and you have to reverse engineer the thoughts that go with those words. And for different actors, those will, with the same set of words, that will be completely different, because it's just about how your imagination fires. But one of the things I love about sort of nastier pieces of work, if you like, is they've often got clearer edges, rougher edges, clearer edges that you can see, and you can go after those edges and go, right, here is a couple of things that I can definitely hold on to with this character. What motivates them?
Yeah, and it must help you in real life as well, because when you see people, this again all goes back to your fascination with people with the advertising, but actually we've all got these dark sides, and you can understand, and none of us think we're bad. So you must be able to use this in real life. God, I tell you, if we ever met in real life, I'd watch my dark side. You'd be like, right, you see where
But
she's coming from.
it's imagination,
Isn't
isn't
it
it? You're
amazing?
yeah,
Yeah,
So,
and it's like what I do in my books when I'm still like a new novel writer, fairly newish. But that's the thing, isn't it? It's getting the motivation, because there's no my book editor always says there's no such thing as a complete baddie. They've got the reason, and it makes them human. Anyway, it's fascinating.
yeah, and for me, you have to be on the side of the character that you play. You have to. That's rule number one for acting.
Yeah.
You have to go there. You have to empathize with them, regardless of how skewed the logic is, but only for the period that you're playing the character. Then you hang them up on the door as you walk out. But I think that's really important. You have to go there. It's really important. You have to honor them and their own sort of version of real life.
Yeah, you do. And I mean, it carries on, because what you do today, you're so busy. You're still doing a mixture of TV. I think I read about a new series coming out in a very well-known streaming, which we won't talk about. But my lawyers aren't so. My Labrador dog Cookie probably couldn't really cope with the lawsuit. Bless her. But you're doing and a lot of theatre as well. But you're constantly busy with the acting. Do you have a preference? Because I know I have interviewed a couple of actors who always say that their heart always lies in theatre, but do you have any particular preference?
Yeah, I'm going to sit really well squarely on the fence here. My training is theatre, so my heart will always lie in theatre. It's what I did when I was at school. It's what I did when I was at uni. It's what I did a bit of Amdram, and it is what I learned when I went to drama school. We did absolutely no television. Actually, it's not true. We had one lesson with a video camera, and that was kind of it. So I've learned theatre, and it's in my blood, and I love theatre, and it really makes my heart sing. I also love television for literally the opposite reasons why I love theatre. So theatre, I love the exploration of it. I love the rehearsal of it. I love the trying out of ideas to see what works and not worrying about the ones that don't work, only taking forward the ones that do. Often you learn far more from something that hasn't worked than you do from something that works immediately. And also knowing that working is sort of what works is purely subjective, both to your taste, the other actor's taste, also the taste of the director of this particular show. So one of the things I love about theatre, and actually the whole acting world in general, is, and the whole artistic world, is there's no right answer. There is only taste. That is all there is. And so in that kind of way, it's fascinating. I love the rehearsal process, and I also love the performing. I've just done The Winter's Tale here in Bristol for we were performing it for 6 weeks. Every audience is different. Every audience will give you a different reaction and make you think about the words and the play in a different way. And I love how, even though you are saying the same words every night for 6 weeks, the show itself is different every night because of the crackle that the audience gives you, and also because of what each of the actors are giving you on stage will always be subtly different every night. Every actors will just be playing with little things depending on what hits their imagination sort of in the moment at any given time. Television, stand and deliver. And I love the immediacy of that. I love the fact that you have to make instant choices and stand by them. And often you're filming stuff way out of order. There was a time on Emmerdale, I remember, when I jumped 20 episodes filming on one episode, and then jumped 20 episodes back and then another 10 episodes forward, 3 scenes in a row. So knowing where you are in the story becomes a key part of the acting sort of process. It's certainly in a soap and in television, and in television there is increasingly sort of less time to film stuff, and so you bring your work in. So you've done all of your preparation before you come into the room, and you bring in your work and you put it on the floor. You've got something like, in a soap, something like 40 minutes for a 2-page scene from the moment you walk onto the floor, to the moment you walk off. And I love that. And that was sort of, having worked in soaps, that was the thing that took me the most time to get used to, that immediacy. But once I got used to it, I really valued it, because it's instant choices, and stand by them. And after a while, when the writers start writing for your character, and the two start to blend together, your character, what you're doing with the character, and what the writers are writing for them, they start to blend together. You start to be able to make clearer, more instant choices more easily, because you have a shared understanding of who this person might be. And so I love that about television. It works in a very different way. And also the frame is different on a stage, 70 feet wide in some places, 30, 40 feet high. That's your frame. 1,000, 1,500 people watching. On television, you've got a foot by, or 3 feet by 2 feet. That's what you got. So, and you're just changing the performance. You feel the same stuff, but what you do technically is you squash it in, squeeze it in, and cover a lot of it up for television. Because if you do a theatre performance on a very sort of close-up television shot, it's going to be too much. So I like that kind of discipline, sort of working with the sort of the difference between the two sort of mediums, if you see what I mean. But it's still the same raw material. You feel the same things, you just show more or less of it, essentially.
Yeah, but what an amazing thing to have the variety. And do you still get nervous when you go out, like in the theatre? Do you, especially I would imagine with, like you say, different audiences every night?
Oh yeah, it's live. Anything could happen.
Yeah.
And sometimes it does.
It does.
And so, so in that kind of way, absolutely I do. I remember, I'm a huge cricket fan, and I remember sort of Jimmy Anderson, before he retired, brilliant, sort of England's greatest all-time fast bowler, him getting asked if he still gets nervous before he bowls, and he's been bowling for England for 20 years, and he went, oh yeah, very much so. And also it's useful. That's useful stuff to have, because in the acting world, there's an acting exercise which is about seven levels of energy, from literally an amoeba lying on the floor like a blob, going to there's an exercise called There's a Bomb in the Room, when everyone's going, oh my god, and the acting energy is somewhere between 4 and 5 on that scale, whereas normal life energy is somewhere around 2 or 3, just kind of hanging out, sort of. And so you need a bit of something extra for it to work on the stage, because you just have to have a presence that is slightly heightened, and nerves, and that kind of adrenaline is really useful for that. So I value that part of it. Actually, it's about what you do with that sort of that sensation, that feeling, and how you channel it.
And amazing, because that's how you're living your life, with this wonderful energy, doing something that you love. And speaking of doing what you love, so this is the thing with you, Mr. Bill. This is the thing, because we don't often allow this, but you have another next chapter. Now, I'm just going to do a little shoehorn, because going back to the clarinet, you are actually in a jazz band. This all comes back from the people that you met at school, called, I love this, the Bram Flakes. And you actually played at Jade Jagger's wedding. So you played for Mick Jagger. So but that isn't your next chapter we're going to talk about, because you're also an incredible photographer. So,
well, thank you.
You are. I've seen. And Mr. Matt Cardy, our mutual friend, who is also a wonderful photographer, he was saying, and he said, and I looked at yours as well. I mean, honestly, you two together, and his wife as well. So, you're all wonderful. But you are, I mean, this is really an incredible part of your life. And have you always been doing this then, alongside all of this?
Yes.
Wow.
For the last sort of 15 years, since about 2009. It's the other thing that I've done. And and it's interesting. And it came about for me because I've always taken a lot of pictures, just always taken a lot of pictures, always. And I did a lot of traveling in between sort of the first advertising job that I did at BBH and Saatchi, and then again after that, done sort of sections of traveling. And what I always took a camera with me, and I travelled on my own, but you always have something to do if you have a camera. And so for me, it gave me something to do all the way around, and a reason to be wherever I was, and also to make a connection with wherever I was. And so this came about sort of professionally. This came about because I did a pilot for a show out in Montreal a long time ago. This would be out about in 2009 with Sarah Wayne Callies, brilliant actor from Prison Break. And we were looking to make a new detective series. And we were making the pilot for it, and it was going to be on Canadian television and on, I think, the public broadcasting cable service in the States too. And we had to wait 4 months after we made the pilot to see if it was going to go to series. And so I was kind of contracted not to do any other acting work in that time. And I kind of thought, right, I've got 4 months. It was November 2009 to about February, March 2010. I've got 4 months. I came back from Montreal where we filmed the pilot to Britain. What am I going to do with this time? And I thought, right, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do what I've always wanted to do, which is to do a kind of photography project. So I bought my first sort of proper digital SLR. It was just around the time that digital cameras were taking over from film cameras, and they had been over the sort of previous 7 or 8 years, but digital cameras had got pretty good by about 2009. So I bought my first one of those, bought my first tripod, and I set myself a project of winter on the coast of eastern England, and it happened to be the coldest winter for 29 years. And I got loads and loads of really interesting stuff. I started up in Newcastle and the coast of Northumberland, and then worked my way down to London, which is where I was living at the time, and then Kent and East Sussex. And after that kind of 4-month period, I had a much better sort of, or a more interesting group of photos than I'd ever expected that I might do. I'd never really done anything like this before. I'd taken a lot of pictures, but I'd never sort of set out to do a sort of specific landscape photography project like this. And so I did that. And then I was doing a theatre gig at the Royal Exchange. It was an Ibsen, Lady from the Sea, and I noticed that in the foyer around the theatre, they were doing an art exhibition, and it was run by the craft shop in the Royal Exchange. And I had a word with them, and I said, listen, is there any chance you would consider showing some photography here? And they went, well, you better show us what it is. And I went, oh yeah. And so I showed them the project, and I went, is this kind of thing? And they went, yes, actually we would show that. So I kind of, and that was really interesting for me, because that was a sort of validation of what I'd been up to, and that was really important for me at the time, because I was just kind of starting out with a tripod and just sort of thinking about the world in that kind of a way. But the other thing that spurred me on to do was, while I was there at the Royal Exchange and I had my camera with me, I set myself up to do a photography project there. And interestingly, and part of the reason why I mentioned the walking down the canals of Manchester earlier on in our natter was that I went there. And I went there because I knew it. And there was all of my favorite things there. There was water, there was history. It's the cradle of the Industrial Revolution, the canals of Manchester, Bridgewater Canal, in lots of ways the first sort of industrial canal ever built. But there was also peace and quiet. And for me, that is the role that photography plays with the acting, because I'm not an out-and-out extrovert. I'm not one of those people who goes to the pub after a show. It's not my bag at all. I kind of like to spend a bit of time on my own and sort of regenerate a bit, and a bit of quiet time. And in a room of actors, I know I'm doing a lot of talking at the moment, but in a room full of actors, I'm almost always the quietest one. Almost always. I'm almost always the one who sits in the corner and doesn't say very much, because everyone else is so entertaining and there's so many good stories. So for me, the role that photography plays, and it's a really, really important one for me, is to balance the extrovert nature of the acting job, with the other half of me, which is quite introverted. And so it's one of those yin yang things where in the acting world I give out, and in the photography world I put back in. And so the main subject matter of my photography is quiet.
Yeah.
It's solitude, and you can find that anywhere. Even in a big city, you can find that. And I'm just doing a project on dandelions at the moment, for instance, and I find that quality with them too. It's just, and I know this is going to sound ridiculous,
Not at all. Not at all.
but it's just a connection between you and the dandelion.
Yeah.
Everything else is irrelevant.
Yeah.
And so that 2 meter gap between you and the dandelion is everything.
Yeah.
And for an hour and a half, that's it. That's your world. You, the dandelion, boom.
Yeah,
That's it.
but what I get it, because that is, you know, I know we talk about mindfulness and things like that, but this is it gives you that space inside as well, and then especially you've got so much going on and all thoughts and everything that goes on. But that, well, I can totally understand it. But again, Bill, you do these things to such a high standard, because you're a judge, I think, now on the UK Landscape Photographer of the Year, and your work has been shown in like fine art galleries all over the country. So it's and you do workshops. So it is not a hobby. This is a very big part of your life.
It's a career. Yeah. I'm sort of 50% photographer and 50% actor these days. And what I generally say is that I do both full time.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. Yeah. And when I'm not acting, I am 100% photographer. And when I'm acting, when I'm on stage, I'm 100% an actor. But what I'm often doing is, so say if I was touring a play or something, during the week, during the rehearsal period, I won't touch a camera at all. I'd just be fully focused on getting the show up and running. But once the show is up and running and we're touring around the country with something, maybe a couple of days a week, I'll just go out in the afternoon for an hour and a half, 2 hours. You always have to keep enough energy back for the show. I'm always conscious that comes first whenever you're touring any piece of work. But the rest of the time, I'll be sort of for an hour and a half, maybe a couple of times a week, I'll be out just seeing what I bump into and just seeing what sort of floats my boat photographically, if you see what I mean. And one of the joys about being a touring actor in that kind of a way is you're always bumping into something new. And photographically, there's all sorts of new stuff that you can. And I often say I love a script in the acting world. I love to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. I love to know with what I'm dealing with. But in the photographic world, I love to improvise. I love to make something of wherever I happen to be. And I have this, but a lot of what I teach and a lot of what I learned from acting, I use in photography because for me, it's an ensemble creation, acting, between you, the rest of the cast, and also the crew, and if it's television, the camera operators, the sound operators, the producers, etc. With photography, I think exactly the same thing applies. It's an ensemble creation between you and wherever you happen to be, and it's trying to make something together. There's a thing in photography about shooting things, capturing things, getting things, and I don't really like working like that. I like to turn up somewhere and see what happens, see what I can make of it. And so in that kind of a way, it is sort of the perfect antidote and to the day job and the other day job that I do. And the other thing that I like about it is that it's unequivocally me. I only take pictures for me. And if you spend as much time as I do pretending to be someone else, that is really, really useful because it keys me into who I am wherever I happen to be. And and so it serves a couple of purposes in that kind of a way. And I find it, I love it. And I love it for what it is as a I was going to say as a discipline, but that's quite a hard word for something that is so giving. So I love what it is for that, but I also love what it gives me in terms of yin yang versus the other thing that I do.
Well, it's almost like a practice, isn't it? It's like a practice, a day, which is incredible. And so, God, I could talk to you, and we haven't even talked about the brown flakes. So, but you're gonna have to come back, Bill. You're gonna have to come back. And so, I mean, with your to be continued, because you really are doing what Next Chapter Living, I personally think is all about, which is why I do these podcasts, is you have created a life truly meant for you, and also all your different parts of you, because it's very easy to think, isn't it, it's all or nothing. So you've got your acting side of you and that part of you, then you've got your photography side of you, and that fits that other side of you. So, and you've obviously, you've got your family life, you've got you love your sport, you love your music. So you have truly built a life that you truly love. I mean, for you to be continued, I'm guessing you'll continue doing all of this.
More of the same, please.
Yes, isn't that a wonderful feeling? And think that lovely man, whoever he was on that train. But you're doing it, aren't you? And it's finding what you love doing and then doing more. And you're always learning, and that means you're always growing. And I think it's not a case of not being. I think this is where sometimes next chapters can be confused, because it can almost be saying, "Oh, well, I'm just not happy with my lot." It's not that. It's growing more and more, because that's what you can do until the day you die. You can just keep growing.
Yeah, I kind of I do like both of the professions that I happen to be doing now are not ones that you tend to retire from, because they tend to be ones that you are wedded to and have a huge emotional investment in. And so in that kind of a way, I very much hope to keep doing them till I pop my clogs.
Yeah, wonderful.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
because they
I'm the
give
same.
back so much to you, if you see what I mean. So yeah, no, I feel very lucky in that regard.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's just so wonderful. And so for your acknowledgements, who are the people you'd like to thank who have helped you along the way?
Oh God. That's such a question, isn't it? I think it's anyone who's ever believed in you. So for me, it's anyone who's ever believed in me, and that would be. Oh, I'm going to tear up now. It's your parents, isn't it?
Yeah.
And everything and all of the sacrifices that they made, which were colossal. And it was very, very difficult, sort of paying for the schools that we went to, and for which I will always be grateful, and from which without which I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now, and I'm always very, very keenly aware of that. So yeah, my brothers and sisters, I guess, because they put up with you.
I think you're probably all right, to be honest. You're not like some of those characters.
Yeah, my partner and my kids, and who sort of on a daily basis help you keep going, don't they? And sort of just always just so many wise words and love that helps, doesn't it? And then also sort of the various kinds of people that you meet on the way, sort of school masters, mistresses, all of that stuff, who with just the odd little shove in various directions. I had sort of all sorts of ones. I had the guy who he was a brilliant man called Mr. Hal Jones, who gave me my first acting part, which was Banquo in Macbeth, and I won't forget that. And he was so encouraging. Just so encouraging. And then also at Big School, when there was a man called John Harrison who was running the theatre that was being built while I was there, and was a huge champion of me and my work then. And it's those kind of Dr. Pemble, who I mentioned, who was the ex-actor, who was my history tutor, but without whom, and that kind of trade-off between the sport and the drama and the work, I wouldn't have been able to do as many of those things as I have. And then sort of after that, it's just anyone in any capacity actually that you meet at work in advertising. It's the people who believe in you and who back you, and who sort of not validate you, but who help you to be who you are.
Well, that is the key, isn't it?
Yeah, it's that, and who don't judge you for that and don't try and make you into somebody else.
Yeah, and what you said there, love, in that is one of, for me, a definition of love, and I write about love, is it's wanting the best for that person, not about you, but about them. And clearly, that's incredible. Before we get cut off, I'm going to see if I can get these last two questions in.
Yes.
So, if someone's listened to this, now you have designed a life you have truly loved, and thank you so much for being so generous with all your thoughts and times and wisdoms. If someone's listened to this and thinking, look, I'm listening to Bill and he is living with his photography, his acting, his family, his love, his sport, I don't feel like I'm living in this way at the moment, but also feeling quite vague, as in, I don't know, I wish I did have a passion like photography or acting, but I don't know what that is. What would you say to that person?
Oh God, that's
it's a toughie.
It's a tricky question, isn't it? I mean, I always had a sense of stuff. So, and which used to sit with me. And so my kind of, not angst, but my battles with myself have been about daring to do things. And so in terms of advice, my advice would be more in that kind of line, having a sense of, you'll have a sense. I had quite a strong argument with myself over a number of years in my 20s about whether I dared to become an actor or just to dare trying to do stuff. And it's that whole thing about, and it's a little bit trite, but feel the fear and do it anyway. Because my whole thing is about what ifs, and I cannot stand them. I kind of like to have tried what ifs, because what ifs and what could have beens. There's a cartoonist, he's called Mordillo, and I grew up, my parents loved him, and I grew up reading these Mordillo, the kind of quite sort of bulbous kind of cartoons. There was one I really remember, and there's a dark street that this cartoon character, it's a human, is walking past, and he's kind of got his shoulders hunched. He's just looking back over his shoulder, and in the dark, on the dark street, there's one alleyway on the left hand side, and it's a blinding alleyway of light. And he's just looking over his shoulder at it, and he's walked past it, and he's looking over his shoulder at it, and on the sign leading into the alleyway it says what could have been. And that has always stayed with me, and I'd rather find out, even if my whole thing with acting was I just don't mind if I crash and burn, I just don't mind, but what I don't want to do is feel like this for the rest of my life. I don't want to feel what might have happened if. And so I trade all of the what could haves for the what I did. And even if the answer to those questions, what I did, are not necessarily the ones that you would ideally have liked, at least you find out. At least you found out. And I just, for me, and just knowing the kind of human I am, that's been the most important thing. And also at the start of a year, when we're sitting there, and my partner's an actor, and we're looking at the year, and you're kind of going, oh my God, how are we going to make a living out of this one? Is to live with the uncertainty and know that somehow during the year you will find a way of filling it, and that's tricky, and it takes a certain amount of faith, blind faith sometimes, but a certain amount of faith, but just, it's about creating the space, isn't it? It's about creating the void, and then trying to live with the uncertainty of that, and trying to accept the uncertainty that comes with that, because that can be tricky. And particularly if you like to sort of be in control of things, but particularly if you like to have some sense, if you've got kids and you need to feed them and buy them shoes, and which are not cheap, and so that kind of a thing. But just to dare.
Do you think, thank you for talking about that, because you're absolutely right, and the insecurity, that is what you could try and control it, and that can stop you from doing so much as well. This is the trouble. Do you think deep down we all know what we want to do? Like you said, you love the idea of advertising and acting, and obviously then photography has come into your life as well. Do you think deep down we all do know at least the subject, or what's right or what's wrong, as in we need a new job, or we need a new relationship, or we do know deep down?
Do you know, it's such a good question. I can only really speak for me, and for me, my sort of thing has been, I've been aware of stuff. So, and even if it's not immediately aware of stuff, you kind of park stuff, you notice it and you park it, and it's letting things sit with you. And then after a while, the acting thing for me was, I was sitting with it, and it kept rearing its head. It kept coming back, and I kept going, at some point I'm going to have to do something about this, because you notice it and you park it. So when I left university, lots of my friends went to drama school, and I considered it, but I was sort of really keen on advertising, and I wanted to do that. But that sense of that never went away for me. And so you will have an awareness, I would imagine, within your being of what makes you tick and what makes you happy and what makes you sort of shine. And it's just having a sense of those kinds of things and allowing them to be present. And then it's a question of what you can do, or what could you do with those feelings, really, and can you make a living from them?
Yeah.
And or just have them as a hobby. There's nothing wrong with doing stuff as hobbies, you know, because you can sort of earn money doing one thing and having something else that gives you loads and loads of pleasure. So it's horses for courses here. I'm sort of vocational in that I've kind of tried to make a living from things that I love doing, and for the most part,
You've done
it's gone okay.
Yeah.
So, but not everybody would necessarily have to go that route. Do you know what I mean? There's so many different ways to live a life, and I feel very lucky that this has worked out so far.
Well, it really, I mean, you've done pretty well. You've done pretty well.
Yeah,
I think that's incredible. I think the key is as well, which has been so true in this entire conversation, is you're being true to yourself. And I think we only know ourselves, and also being responsible, isn't it? And making these things, at least taking that step to, like you say, rather than going like, what if I'd done that? That's if you can avoid going down that route, surely it's going to be better off. But thank you. But my very final question, so my mission with my novels that I'm writing, I've learned so much about advertising and characters, so I wasn't expecting that. I've been taking notes, so thank you so much. And baddies so my mission with my books is to, one of the favorite, like live a life you love, is to sit around a pool and read a book in a day, you know, and I think that's a lovely thing to do, and I would love to be able to do that with my books, with my fiction books. What would you say is a book that you would read around a swimming pool that you wouldn't be able to put down?
Do you know, it's such a good question, and I'm literally the worst person to ask this question of, because I've never sat by a swimming pool.
Do you know what? As I said that, I was thinking, I can't really imagine Bill ever sitting down. Maybe like you take a photo of the book. Yeah.
No, it was funny. I was just been thinking about this, and it just kind of go, oh no, how am I going to answer this? Because it's kind of, I'm a bit of a doer. That's really, it's a double-edged sword for me. I'm not a big sitter downer, and in many ways I wish I was. And I so most
you would probably write it. That's the thing. You'd write it. So okay, well I'm going to employ your acting skills. So let's use one of your characters. So dare I say it? Let's go back to Charlie Stubbs, and imagine if he was on holiday, and he was sitting around the pool. What do you think he would read in a day?
Oh God, it's been so long since I thought about him. That's the root. What would he have read? That's really interesting. I had a thing about Charlie Stubbs actually, which was that he loved Northern Soul, and I had quite a big backstory about him and Northern Soul, and so I wonder, something to do with that. Sort of something to get him out of the present into, I don't know. So if anyone has ever written a Northern Soul based novel, so maybe that, maybe something like that. For me, the kinds of things I like, stuff that is sort of, I read quite a lot of factual books actually. I read a lot of things about, there's an author whose work I love, which is it's to do with noticing in the countryside or with water, and it's a chap called Tristan Gooley. He's written a brilliant book about how to read water.
Wow.
And I love that kind of thing. And there was another guy, a chap called Gavin Preeter Pinney, who wrote a brilliant book about cloud spotting, the Cloud Spotter's Guide, which is all about just looking up, which is beautiful in its own way. And so I tend to sort of those kind of books about connections with the natural world. Kay Tempest, brilliant poet, musician. My partner gave me their book, called On Connection. What a book that is. That is just fabulous, so insightful about making stuff and noticing what's around you and how it feels as a creative person to make stuff. And then there's a book that I've just started reading, which I may never finish reading. I do that with a lot of books, but On the North, which is my own roots, really, by Paul Morley, which has been out for a while, but I've been meaning to get round to that and mining my own roots, really. And the older you get, I think, the more you have a sense of where you're from. I certainly do, particularly sort of exiled in the southwest, talking to you from Bristol. I have a strong sense of where I'm from, and so just looking at that and going back to your roots and that sense of belonging and where you're from, I'm interested in having a read of that. So I tend not to read so much fiction. I wish I did. I wish I read more, but if you did chain me to a sun lounger,
that's what you do. Well, to be fair,
I might read something like that.
You actually live your life in a lot of fiction, so I think we'll let you off.
Yeah, I wonder if that is a reason.
Yeah.
I've often wondered if that's a reason. And interestingly, I have read much less fiction since I've been acting. And I used to read things, Graham Smith, Swift, I think, Waterland. It was one of those books which left a huge impression on me. And so I used to read quite a lot of fiction, but I don't anymore. And I wonder if you're right. I think that's very perceptive. I think that's a good shout. I think that might well be true.
Well, I tell you what is true. You have been the most amazing guest. I've learned so much from Arthur the Cat to Moments, to Charlie Stubbs, to Coronation Street, to photography. I thank our very lovely mutual friend / brother-in-law, Matt Cardy, for putting us in touch. But thank you so much, Bill. You're an amazing man. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful guest on The Next Chapter.
My absolute pleasure, Ellie. Look, just wishing you all the best with it. Great stuff.